It's on the internet. Um,
Well, I think from having done these before with Carl, he may want to take some close-ups of this. We put them up
Yeah,
on
that's
the
fine. That's
board.
why I brought it, and I brought you some photographs also.
Oh, great.
Uh, This photograph is really, unfortunately, I gave a whole bunch of stuff to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. I think I told you.
Yes.
And I spoke to the curator now in Washington. And some of it is on there, but some of it, the pictures are not because of
They
COVID.
got backed up.
But this is
Yeah.
my most famous picture if you look at it carefully, because look what it says in the back. It's a park bench. Can you read it? It says Nur für Arjen.
It's only for Aryans.
Nur für Arjen, meaning only Aryan can
Aryans.
sit there.
Mhm.
And that's my grandfather.
Interesting. And this is you?
This is me. I was a baby,
Wow.
And that was a picture of my mother. Also part, you can see the beautiful building in Vienna in the back.
Oh, yes. It is beautiful. So this is Shifra.
Sorry?
This is Shifra?
Yeah.
Wow. This is great.
Yeah. Well, the worst part is that everybody is dead. It's my sister died, my brother-in-law is dead. It's like the end
Well,
of the line.
That's why I'm so pleased you're doing this.
Huh?
I'm so pleased you're doing this because you
Oh.
are giving testimony to them, you're mentioning their names,
I want to do it really for my granddaughter.
and mentioning their names is important for her to
Mm.
hear.
Yep, I guess so. It is.
That's how we keep their memories alive.
Her story is good. I think it's a very nice story. I reread it the other night,
Mhm.
but she left out quite a few things. And one of the problem is my parents never really spoke about it. They didn't speak much about it. I got most of my information from my two aunts who lived in New York. And I was close to them. My sister
Mhm.
lived in Montreal.
Mhm.
She was not really close to them.
I think they're going to mic you up.
We're all ready.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, we just have to do the slate. If you're ready to start.
Oh, you have a different mic now.
Well, you get mine,
Oh, okay.
and then Ms. Chapman's mic is right here.
Okay. You hold on to those.
Yeah, sure.
Vera.
And then I have a little table for some of those pictures when we're ready for that. Get your little garbage can too. There's a little garbage can for you.
Is your phone off? Your phone?
Oh, yes, I better put it, you're right. Okay. Yep. I have some pictures on my phone also.
Can you take pictures on the phone?
We might be able to put it on the stand and get like video of the phone and, so we'll try.
Okay.
Okay.
No, because they're nice pictures, actually. But I didn't feel like bringing them all.
So
When you're ready. Ms. Chapman, you will hold this. Ms. Firmo's gonna
Okay.
read that.
This is an interview with Vera Chapman on October 9th, 2023, October 9th, 2023. The interviewer is Jenny Frumer, and it takes place in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you so much, Vera, for doing this interview.
My pleasure.
You've told me what motivated you to do this. Can you tell me again why you're doing this interview and why you feel it's so important to do right now?
Well, I think it's important for various reasons. I think most of the survivors have died or are at the end of their lives. And we need to document it for future generations. And the more documentation we have, I think it's going to make more of an impact on future generations, especially when it seems just when we think that we Jews are safe, we are not safe. So we cannot just shove it into history. The Holocaust, unfortunately, is here to stay, to be remembered. And most of all, I would like my lovely granddaughter to know about it.
What is your granddaughter's name?
Her name is Gray Chapman, and she's 9 years old. So, and I try to expose her to as many Jewish experiences as possible, because my son does know about the Holocaust. He's been to Israel, he's been to the Holocaust Museum. He knows what happened. My daughter-in-law is not Jewish, and she does not take her to church, but I'm walking a very fine line. So I do expose my granddaughter to history and children's parties at my synagogue and also at the Chabad house, so here in Palm Beach. So basically, this is what the interview is for. And of course, I have been appalled over the years about, we have a lot of assimilated young Jewish kids who really know nothing about the Holocaust. And I don't understand it. So it's very important for us to document it and get them interested in history and what happened.
In terms of documenting this,
Sorry?
I was just going to say, let me know if you can't hear me.
Yes.
In terms of documentation and your testimony, tell us your story.
You want to hear my story, is that it?
Yes.
Okay. The story I'm going to tell you, of course, I always say it's not from my personal experience because I was too young. But it's a story that I was told by my elders, some of it by my parents, although it took them years to even speak about their experiences. My two aunts, surviving aunts, and my sister who wrote this little book. So where do you want me to start? I was born February 1938. I think it was 3 weeks before the Anschluss. in Vienna, Austria. It was my parents. My father was a very successful businessman. I just want to go back in history. My father was born in a small town. I can't remember the name, but I know it's on the internet with the Holocaust Museum. They already put it on there. It was a small, what I'd call shtetl, in Poland. Then Poland, now it's Ukraine. And he grew up with a very, very Orthodox family. There were 5 siblings, and they were very poor. And he ran off at the age of 15. He ran off to Vienna. Very smart. He apprenticed himself to an upholsterer and learned about textiles. At the age of 16, he established his own business, and then from that grew his own business into export-import of mostly cotton raw material. You may not know that, but cigarette paper, for example, is made out of cotton raw material. His warehouse was, we always called it, was full of schmattes, which were classified according to fiber. And he became very successful in Vienna. They had a nice life there. They lived modestly. I did go to see where they lived years ago in an apartment building. And they, my mother, on the other hand, came from a totally different family. She came from a small town. She was born in a small town called Yekaterinoslav, which is near Odessa. Of course, Jews didn't live in White Russia. They were not allowed to live in White Russia until the 1917 revolution. So they lived in Ukraine, which most people don't realize. My great-grandfather was a stolen child. Do you know what that is?
Tell us.
Okay. The Cossacks, part of the Tsar's army, and of course the Tsars were the biggest anti-Semites, they used to go into the little villages and steal little boys. And so my great-grandfather was a stolen child. He did not know he was Jewish. But they released them. Apparently they treated them okay, but they taught them to be soldiers. And I believe it was that at the age of 28 or thereabout, they were released, but they had no idea they were Jewish. Somehow he found out he was Jewish. But as a result, my grandfather and my mother did not grow up in a religious setting at all. She came to Vienna when she was a baby, when she was 1 year old, with her father, my grandfather, and my grandmother. And she had 3 siblings. Her natural mother died of TB when she was 6 years old, and also left 2 other children. My uncle, her brother Alex, the youngest, and the oldest, her name was Mina. And it's interesting as to what happened to them. Then my grandfather married his sister-in-law. That was according to Jewish religion. It was a mitzvah. She was widowed and came into the marriage with a son by the name of Simonia. And then my grandmother and grandfather had another child, a girl by the name of Liesel. So that was the family. That part, those children all survived. And they have interesting escape stories in themselves. And I knew them all. I never knew my grandfather because I was an infant. And unfortunately, he was already sick. He had cancer. So at first, he could go to the hospitals, but that ended very shortly because Jewish doctors lost their license, and non-Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat Jews. So as a result, he, something in my sister's book, it's incorrect, he died on the streets of Vienna of cancer of the mouth. A Christian doctor did take pity on him and fed him with morphine. So you couldn't even go to a drugstore and fill out a prescription. Well, to get back to my father, he thought, like so many other Jews, unfortunately, that Hitler would blow over.
Before you continue, would you tell me the names of your grandparents and your mother and your father?
My grandfather's name was Peter. His last name was Kosovsky. My grandmother went by two different names. One was Fania, and the other one, I'll tell you, the Austrian government just put up a monument. I saw it. I was in Vienna a year ago. And they had just put it up in a beautiful park. And I have a picture of it actually on my phone. And her name is memorialized there. There were 18, I think there was 18,000, I don't remember the exact number, of Austrian Jews who were murdered in the camps. And her name appears. My grandfather is actually buried in the Jewish cemetery in Vienna. I did see his grave. My uncle, who escaped the Holocaust, he's also buried there, and his wife is buried there. The last name was Kosovsky. So, what else did you want to know?
Your father's name and your mother's
Oh, my
name.
father's name. My father's legal name was Max Friedman, with two N's. He had a Hebrew name, Moses, and to this day I'm not quite sure whether Moses was the legal name or Max was the legal name. And of course, Moshe was his Hebrew name. My mother's name was Shifra. Her first name was Shifra. Her maiden name was Kosovsky. Married name was Friedman with two N's. My father died when he was 53 here in New York. And she later on remarried for a short time because the second husband died. But it was somebody she knew from Vienna. So, and he was a friend of theirs in Vienna. And a widower came to New York, also a refugee. So anyway, to get back to my father, what happened was when, of course, he didn't believe that this was going to last, like so many other Jews. To just digress for a minute, they had a very good life in Vienna. As I say, my father was successful in business. I didn't even know how successful until after he died. But my mother had a good life. She never worked. she used to take my sister. They went to Italy in the summertime, which was customary. And, you know, they went to the opera. They really enjoyed a good life. When the Anschluss took place, their housekeeper actually reported them to the police at that time. And so and of course they were registered in the Jewish community, so they knew they were Jewish. My father was arrested by the police shortly after the Anschluss, and he was kept there for one day and released. What I never knew from my father or my mother, because they never ever spoke about it, that somehow later on, and I really don't know whether it was a month later or 2 months later, he was arrested again, and he was put in a Gestapo prison. And he was kept there for, I think it was 2 weeks. My aunt, who lived in New York before she died, my mother's half-sister, she told me about it. She couldn't believe that I didn't know that. And so he never spoke about it, but I think he was tortured because apparently he had given up smoking years before, and then he had to go into hiding. What happened was, at that time, you could either buy your way out or you were sent to a camp. There were already hundreds of working camps. They were not extermination camps, but they were working camps. So he bought his way out and went into hiding in his own warehouse. And my mother would bring him food and clothes and whatever else he needed. But he didn't have a bed there. It was a horrible way to live. My mother also was visited by the Gestapo because they wanted to know where the Jew Friedman is. That's in my sister's book. And apparently they searched the apartment, and of course she was in school, so it was very hard for her to experience it. They turned over furniture looking for jewelry, money, like they did in a lot of other places. And apparently they had money hidden in the drapes, and they didn't find it. So after that, they said they're coming back and they're going to take the 2 brats, meaning my sister and me. I was a baby. They're going to get rid of them. These are the words to my mother. So my mother decided to send, I think at that point, my sister could no longer go to the school she went to, the secular school. And so she was sent to a Jewish school, but they closed the Jewish school. So she was sent to the country, to a village, with a former Christian teacher. Obviously, they paid her. And apparently she was very good to her, and she went to church with her every Sunday, and she had to learn to cross herself. My sister was blonde, blue eyes, so she sort of fit in. However, the people in the village became suspicious. How come? Because she was introduced by the teacher as her cousin or niece, well, from Vienna. How come all of a sudden you have this cousin? So when they became suspicious, she had to go back to Vienna. And my mother, and then of course, Kristall, and she talks in the book about experiencing, actually seeing Jews being taken and forced to lick the pavement with their beards or faces. And, she was 12 years old, so of course it was a horrible experience. She didn't understand the magnitude. So anyway, my parents knew, of course, Kristallnacht took place, and it was a horrible experience with all the synagogues being burnt and the books being burnt. Well, they knew they had to leave. First, my two aunts, they were both unmarried, and they left. You couldn't get papers to go anyplace. There were huge lines at every embassy. So the oldest sister, my Aunt Mina, she found out that she could go to England as a cook. She never cooked in her life, but she got a visa. And then she got a visa. She was a very enterprising woman. She later got a visa for the half-sister, for Liesel, the youngest. And she got a visa for her as a chambermaid. And she didn't know how to make a bed. So they escaped in 1939 to London. And they were able to get in there, and they survived the war. They both got married and survived the war, and then came to America after the war. And I did know them. I did meet them. My uncle, Alex, who was the only uncle I ever knew, he was a great guy. He was married. He was my mother's younger brother. And he had a family. He had a wife, Lotte, and my cousin, Gerda, and I knew them all. They escaped to Shanghai. They were one of the Shanghai Jews. And they survived the war there. That's a separate story in itself, which most people don't know. My uncle Alex was always in the wine and champagne business. And of course, it's a well-known fact that the Chinese ambassador in Vienna was very helpful to the Jews. He ended up there. And he became successful there because he did business with the American Navy and British military. And he also had a bar business there. But at some point when the Japanese invaded China, one of the top generals, Nazi generals, came over and he said, there are 35 Jewish immigrants, mostly from Austria and Germany, that are here. And he told that to the Japanese commander. And he said, I want you to put them, Shanghai it's a bay, and at that time there were a lot of wooden barges there. He said, I want you to put these people on the wooden barges and set them on fire. Japanese did not do it. Why? They didn't do it because apparently, and this was told to me by Nancy Spielberg. I didn't even know that as to why. Apparently, when Japan became, after the Russian-Japanese War at the end of the 19th century, Japan became an empire. And a guy, a Jewish banker by the name of Fisher, I think that was his name, from the Midwest, someplace, helped them structure their financial and economics. And they were smart enough to realize that they may need the help, that they, of course, were going to win the war with the Germans. And in the future, they're going to need the help of some very smart Jews, bankers. So they never did that. But the Jewish community did know about it, that was the plan. So they never executed it. Well, to get back to my parents, my own situation, my mother actually was instrumental, with the help of my father, who was hidden, to get falsified papers, because at the end of 38, I think was, or beginning of 39, I think was either December 38 or January 39. You couldn't leave the Austria on legitimate papers unless you had papers to go someplace else. I think that was the law, if I'm not mistaken. And so she arranged for falsified papers. They always knew that they could go to Palestine at that time, because my mother's half-brother, Simonian, the one that came into the marriage, right? He was a Zionist. He studied at the University of Vienna, became an engineer, and left for Palestine in 1935. So he was established there. And so they always knew that he was getting papers for them and for my grandfather and grandmother. However, when we left, my grandfather was too sick. He couldn't travel. And my grandmother wouldn't leave him alone. So the tragedy is that she stayed with him. I used to have letters that she wrote in German to my parents in then Palestine, and they. But I think my nephew in California has them today. I really don't have them anymore. But basically, it told how horrible life was in Vienna. She was, because he died shortly after we left, and she talked about how horrible it was living alone in dire poverty. And in 1942, they took her. I didn't realize she was quite young. I found out in Vienna last year. I think she was only 50. She died in Theresienstadt, but she was in another camp before then. I don't know the name of it, but it is documented. But it's a camp. I think it was a camp in Austria. So she died in Theresienstadt. We had falsified papers. We went to the train station. My grandparents accompanied us to the train station. We went from Vienna to a town called Aachen. It's quite famous because Aachen is on the German-Belgian border, and it borders the woods. That's where the Battle of the Bulge took place, are these woods. And many years ago, about 15 years ago, I did take a guide in a Jeep, and we went through the woods. I wanted to see them. And they're very dense, and what's interesting is they still, to this day, they can't get rid of some of the German fortifications there, because they're so solid. So apparently, I think they're still there. I don't know. I did that a while ago. So anyway, we went to Aachen, which is Germany. You couldn't stay in a regular hotel because you had to register, and you couldn't register. And so the taxi driver took my father, my sister, my mother, and me to a hotel which was known to house Jews. So it was full of Jewish people. And my father took one look at it, and he said, "Drive on, we're not staying here." And they came to, they passed a small inn. My father got out of the car. He explained the situation, because the innkeepers, so the taxi driver, they knew why we were there, to cross into Belgium. So he struck a deal with the innkeeper. He said, "You know, we're only going to be here a couple of days on business, and we won't make any noise or anything." And the innkeeper, he said, "I'll pay you more." The innkeeper was very nice. He said to him, "Not going to charge you more regular rate, but please, you cannot come downstairs to the bar or the dining room. We will bring you food upstairs, and don't make any noise, and try not to go to the bathroom at night, you know, during the day." Okay. So that night, the Jewish hotel was raided. And from what I understand, the people were all sent to camps. So we were very lucky. Very lucky. Then, of course, they had to cross, and this is why my father needed the time to establish contact with guides to take us through the forest. Now, the guides were farmers that you paid them cash and they took you across. Some were honest, took the money and brought you across. Some were not. And they took the money and turned you over to the Gestapo. So my father struck a deal with whoever it was, but they were all farmers. Give you half money. He tore the bills in half. Whatever they were charging, I don't know what. He said, "When we get across the border, I'm going to pay you in full." Oh, and be reunited with my baby, because they had to give me up. They could not travel with me. I was an infant. So he said, "And we're reunited with the baby. I'll give you the full amount and a tip equivalent to the full amount." So perhaps this is what saved us, I don't know. I was taken, my parents and my sister traveled on foot for 3 days and 3 nights. I was taken across the border in a taxi by one of the either wives or girlfriends of one of the guides to a farmhouse. And this is where I was kept. And apparently there were other babies there also, because I remember later in life, wasn't very smart for my mother to say that, but when I did something that required punishment, she said to me in German, she said, "I think you were exchanged with another baby." Not very smart, my mother to say. So anyway, My parents and my sister walked the woods, which was a horrible, my sister talks about it in the book, for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, they get to the farmhouse where I was kept, and apparently the woman was very nice, and she ran out with me, and my mother kissed her. And you know, when you think about it, it was a horrible decision to make, because my parents didn't know if they were ever going to see me again. They didn't know whether they were going to survive, whether I would be all right, but they had no choice, because it was my sister, the 2 of them, and there was no way these guides would take a chance with a baby. So, and apparently they walked very close to the patrols. They were patrolling, the Germans were patrolling the woods. And they were within a few feet of the Germans. So until they made it and saw the farmhouse, which was on Belgian territory, they didn't know. So then they get to the farmhouse. They're now in Belgium. My grandfather, before they left, when they went with them to the train station, gave my mother, because her background is from Ukraine, he gave her the name of distant, I guess it was, I don't know whether it was first cousins or probably second cousins, family by the name of Katzel. And I have to show you something interesting later. They immigrated from Ukraine or Russia, but probably Ukraine, way back to Belgium. And he said, here, take the address. I don't know if there was a phone number, but take their names, their address. And my father poo-pooed it. He said, what are you going to do? Go look up relatives that never heard of you and you never heard of them before? So my mother took it anyway, put her in her bag. And we get to Belgium. We're now going to Brussels. Well, Brussels already had laws that required, because there were a lot of refugees coming into Brussels, especially. And it required for you to register with the police and show your papers. And you could only stay for 3 months. And then you had to go someplace else. So they went to, and that was, somehow, again, there was a Jewish hotel. It was more than one hotel. They were where they didn't ask any questions. Why? And you didn't have to register, because they were in the red light district. And the red light district, the police and the hotel, small hotels, had an agreement not to bother each other. So the illegal Jews were all gravitated to these places. And apparently my sister was very happy. She had no idea where she was, but she recognized some of her schoolmates at this one hotel where they were taken. And my father was not happy with the situation. It was horrible. I know my mother told me, she said there was laundry, small rooms crammed with children and husbands and wives, and laundry in the room, and dirty. And of course you had prostitutes and their things sharing the hotel with them. So my father was very unhappy. He said to my mother, where is that relative of yours with the address I think I'm going to go visit them, or you go visit them. So she saw them, and they were wonderful. They lived in a very large apartment, and they insisted that we stay with them. I was growing up, I always thought that, and my parents always thought that because they for some reason, they never got in touch with each other, that they were killed after the invasion into Belgium, because the Jews that were in Belgium, including one of my father's brothers, they were all sent to camps, and many of them were sent to Auschwitz. So they didn't think they survived the war. However, because of something, I'll show you an email in a few minutes, apparently they did escape at the last minute before Dunkirk, or maybe afterwards, to London. And this is where the family, apparently it was a very nice, very affluent, very nice family. In fact, one of them supposedly came to America and became a theater producer, but they're all dead. One of their descendants, it would be like a fifth cousin of mine, he looked up the family tree, and he wrote about 5 years ago, he wrote an email. It was addressed to my sister. She was already dead. But my nephew got it. And so he forwarded it to me, and then I wrote to him. And this very distant cousin, he said, it's my great-great-grandfather who was your host in Belgium. And he was born in London, but apparently he didn't like, because I was in touch with him once, he did not like the smog in London, didn't like the way London was going with the UK and everything. So he lives in Australia on a farm. I don't know whether he bought the farm or what, but I have a distant cousin now in Australia. So to get back to my parents and me, my sister actually went to school there, to a private school, girls' school there in Brussels. And I had my first birthday there. And my mother, my father was very happy there because he always had an office in Belgium, in Brussels. And his youngest brother, Ignaz, managed it. And he was happy, you know, he could do business from there. And he said they all thought that France would not lose the war because of the Maginot, was it Maginot? The border that France had supposedly protecting them. However, the Germans went around it and attacked from another front. And therefore, Belgium would be safe. Nobody believed that the Nazis would occupy Belgium. My mother kept pushing my father to leave. She did not want to stay in Brussels. She did not feel protected or secure. She said, we have the papers to go to Palestine, and I want to go. And it proves a point because I think in times of crises, of a war crisis, somehow successful men, I'm talking about, fold their tents they don't know. They become paralyzed. They don't know what to do. I think that was not just the case with my father. I think it was the case with a lot of men, especially successful men. They didn't know how to deal with it. I think the females, I always wanted to write a book about it, how women saved us. They were very enterprising, and somehow they had the sixth sense to know that you had to get out of a situation. So he finally listened to her, and I remember my mother very clearly told me, and so did my father. He was going to take us, because he thought my mother was hysterical. He was going to take us to Palestine, make sure we were okay, and then go back to Belgium and continue his business, and his brother was there to help him. Of course, that never happened. So we went from, in 1939, we went from Brussels to Paris, Paris to Marseille, boarded a freighter called the Pasha Marietta or Marietta Pasha. The boat went to Alexandria, Egypt, Alexandria to Haifa. And we came to Tel Aviv because my mother's half-brother, Simonia, lived on, have you been to Israel? Yeah, okay. You know where the Hilton Hotel is on Hayakon, Rehov Hayakon? My uncle lived at 238 Hayakon Street, which is exactly diagonally across from the Hilton. It was the last private home to be raised, because today it's Embassy Row. And you can't even, the last time I was in Israel, you couldn't even drive into that part of the street without, there's a gate there. Now, what was across the street where the Hilton is was a British Army base. I mean, there was nothing on Hayakon Street except for my uncle's house that we went to visit. He wanted my father to build a house next to him. And my father said to him, "Are you crazy? I'm going to build a house across the street from a army base? I got 2 daughters." So he didn't, and so we ended up living on Rehov Rhinus, which is near Kikar Dizengoff, if you know where that is, you know. At that time, of course, it was the Tzafon. Today, it's the center of a very busy street. We lived in a small house there on Rhinus Street. And that's where I grew up.
What was that like for you growing up?
Was it nice?
What was it like? for
What
you
was it
growing up?
like? Well, it wasn't the same country. First of all, I mean, this is what I do remember. It was a British mandate. There were, because of the Haganah and the Irgun, and there was always a curfew going on, sometime or another. This is before the State of Israel was established. There was a lot of, I remember walking with, all right, I'll get to that later, but you know, you didn't quite feel safe. Also, during the war, I mean, I remember, I guess, 42, 43. I don't remember, you can look up the year Rommel was piling through Egypt. They were going to come to Palestine, kill every Jew there, which is not unlikely what's happening right now. And of course, you have the Arab leader, the Mufta was his name, Mufta. I think it was a Mufta. He worked in very close he was in very close contact with the Nazis, of course, and worked with them and promised. I mean, these were the Arabs, to annihilate every Jew, and this is even before the state of Israel was established. It wasn't, my father always worked. I never saw him. He worked very hard. He established this part of the business in Israel, then Palestine. He traded with Egypt, Lebanon, I don't know, other countries, and he did make a lot of money. My mother didn't speak one word of Hebrew the whole time she lived there, because they were, the Israelis, the Sabras, didn't talk to them. And they didn't know, the Austrian and German Jews were the Yekas, they called them. And they didn't know how to talk to them either, because they didn't speak the language. So my mother, and she found her friends, her Austrian friends, and they would go to the coffee shop, the one coffee shop in Tel Aviv at the time, every afternoon, and socialize. I mean, this is what I still remember, that my mother was always in a coffee shop with her friends. I, of course, lied. I did not, none of my classmates knew I wasn't born there, here. I told them all I was a Sabra, I was born. But of course they knew my parents were Yekas. And my sister had a much harder time. We went to the same school, but she was so much older, and I think they made fun of her. And what was interesting, and of course my parents hired a tutor for her to learn Hebrew, but what is interesting is that I always knew that none of her friends were Sabras. They were all transplants mostly from Austria. One I know was the granddaughter of Preminger, and the other, the filmmaker, and the other one was related to the famous author Bialik. But they were not Sabras. And as a friend of mine explained to me here in the US years later, because she was a Sabra, and she became a very good friend of mine, lived here for many years, she said to me, "You have to understand something. We were ashamed that the Jews in Europe were being slaughtered the way they were. They didn't put up a fight. I mean, of course you have the Warsaw Ghetto, the fight there were maybe one or two. They didn't understand that they had no chance. They couldn't fight because they were stripped of everything. They didn't have a penny to their name. They had no clothes. They were put in a uniform, ragged uniform. How could they fight? They couldn't. It wasn't really until the Eichmann trial when the Israelis finally realized the magnitude. I was there for one day when they were deliberating, and it was really horrible to listen to some of the testimonies. So, of course, this is when Israel went way out, and of course today you have the Day of Silence when everything at a standstill. Very respectful, and of course they honor it and everything like that. But at that time it was different. So I never spoke, I didn't, well, my friends knew I spoke German, but I never spoke to my mother or my father when they were in the house, when my friends were in the house. And I was totally mute. And of course I didn't speak to my mother on the street because she didn't speak Hebrew and I wouldn't speak German to her. Which was, it was very difficult for them for my mother more than my father, because he was a businessman. So as long as his business worked, he was okay. I spoke a few words of Hebrew, spoke a few words of Arabic, and he spoke a little bit of English, but not a very good English. So as I say, I grew up there. I can't tell you that I grew up as a true Israeli, because I never went to, I went to a kibbutz, yes, with my school to see, I've seen what it looked like. And I think we spent one night there. And I must tell you, I wasn't really happy because I wasn't used to this community spirit, so to speak. You know, today I find it fascinating, but at that time I wasn't used to it. So then the war took place, and I remember when the British were leaving Palestine, and I was walking with my father on one of the major streets in Tel Aviv. Two Arabs were walking in front of us, two Arab men, and they were speaking, and I did speak some Arabic at that time. I don't anymore, and my father did also. So it was Palestinian Arabic. So what they were saying is they were pointing to apartment buildings, and they were saying, you know, we are going to push all these Jews into the sea, and we're going to take over the country. And they were looking around at the apartment buildings, and they said, this is where I want to live, this is where my brother is going to live, and this is where you are going to live. They were so sure that they were going to defeat us. And so I still remember that conversation. You never forget something like that. And of course, I also remember when the State of Israel was established. We were all at Kikar Dizengoff. There were thousands of people, and I was a little girl. But my parents took me there, my sister went there, and everybody was shouting and dancing, carrying on, of course. We had a hard time after that. Jerusalem was under siege. They did not have enough food there. There was rationing in Israel. Look, I grew up with an icebox. I didn't know what a refrigerator was until just about the year before we left the country for the last time. But there was an iceman that used to come on the street twice or three times a week and announce he was there. And I used to go to school. My father had a car. He had a driver. I wouldn't let the driver take me to the school. He had to let me off 2 blocks, I think, before.
How come?
I was embarrassed. You don't understand. There were very few cars. I went to a private school, Geula School on Achov Geula, which was near Yafo, actually, at the time. But I didn't want my classmates to know that my father had a car. It was, it was not It was a different country. And so then, after the State of Israel was established, I should just tell you, my father was arrested again by the British because he and Menachem Begin were good friends. And my father was always, today he would be a staunch Republican, there's no question about it. But he was always on the conservative end. And yeah, I used to sit on his lap, on Menachem Begin's lap. They lived very close to us in a very modest home. And he was very devoted to his wife. I remember I met her as a child several times. And I also went to the Menachem Begin Museum. There is a museum next to, have you ever been there? It's something every Jew should go to because it's a small museum right almost next to the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. And when you watch the films and you watch his actions and speeches in the Knesset, you realize he probably was the greatest politician and greatest prime minister. He was wonderful. I can't believe what a great prime minister he was and how smart he was. Anyway, so they arrested my father because they thought we were hiding, this is before the State of Israel, that we were hiding one of the Haganah or Irgun people. I don't remember who they were looking for. But they searched the house, they put him on an open truck, and they took him to the police station, and then they released him.
For those people who don't know what the Haganah and the Irgun was, can you describe that?
Well, the Haganah is the forerunner of the IDF. Irgun was much more belligerent. Haganah and Irgun were always fighting with each other because Haganah was much more conservative, more diplomatic. They did not think the right thing to do was to blow up buildings all the time. And of course the Irgun, and there was another co-party, I think it was Stern, I don't quite remember the Stern organization, but they're quite militant and they performed terrorist actions against the British, very much so. And they, of course, blew up the King David Hotel, and quite a few people died. Haganah was very much against it. I know they actually, I don't know whether it was at that time or before, they arrested quite a few, it was Jews fighting against Jews. And of course there was the famous incident with a ship. It's in her book, I don't remember exactly the name of the boat. The Haganah blew it up. It was a horrible thing. However, when the war broke out, they had to make peace because they had to get together and fight the enemies. So Ben Gurion and Begin and all those people had to get together and fight the same enemy. And basically, this is what's going to happen today, because even though you have all these factions. Israel always had about 30 splinter parties, and that's part of the problem. It's always been the problem there. So to be successful in leading the country, you had to form coalitions with parties you didn't even care for. And that, of course, presents a big problem. And of course, you know everything that's been going on in Israel with the in-house fighting over the Netanyahu and the Constitution. And right or wrong, they have to put that aside and get together and fight the same enemies together. It's the same thing. So, yes, my sister and brother-in-law were married in Israel, and they went on a honeymoon to Haifa. They had an apartment. When they came back, it was before the State of Israel was established. It took place around the same time that the King David was bombarded. There was a curfew in the whole country, and they were newlyweds. They had a problem getting back to their apartment. They had no food there, and actually, they arrested quite a few people in this apartment building. I remember they lived on Rehov Dizengoff. And so my mother decided she had to bring them food, but there was curfew. You couldn't leave your house. So she got food together, and she said, I'm going out to, because it wasn't that far, on foot to Rehov Dizengoff. And so, of course, she was almost arrested by two patrol people, and she explained to them what the problem was, that their daughter and son-in-law just came back from their honeymoon. She's bringing them food and water. And so they walked her over to the apartment building, and they waited for her to bring the food, and then they walked her back because they want to make sure that she would be okay. In the meantime, my sister and brother-in-law thought that she was arrested. But we used to call the British Kalaniyot because they all wore red berets. And Kalaniya is the name of an Israeli flower. I don't know what you call it in English because I very rarely see it here. But it's a very pretty flower. So I grew up with really, I didn't like the British. But I found out later that most of them were actually mercenaries. I mean, they weren't all British. There were some that were, but they were paid, you know. And so who knows whether anti-Semites or not, I really don't know. They did their job. They did what they were told to do. My uncle from Shanghai, of course the communists came, I think it was 1948 or so, 49. So of course everybody left Shanghai. They took a luxury liner. My uncle was building the biggest house in Israel, right outside of Tel Aviv. And he was all his life, he was in the wine and champagne business and distribution. And unfortunately, it was the very wrong time for him to be in Israel because it was before they had any kind of a liquor or wine industry, and he almost went bankrupt there. But I remember when they arrived, I was very disappointed. I thought I would see, because I read some of Pearl Buck's books, and I was very disappointed. I expected to see my aunt and uncle and cousin, who I adored, with slanty eyes and braids and instead I saw. So anyway, my cousin, I adored my cousin. She was 7 years older than me, so she was never that close to my sister because of the age, and also because early on she moved to Montreal. But my cousin I adored to the day she died, and she was my role model. I thought she was so beautiful, and and at that point when the communists came to China, took over China, a lot of Austrian Jews who fled to Shanghai came to Israel and stayed here. Some went to New York. And I still remember them there. My cousin shared a room with me in the house. Her parents stayed in the hotel. She contracted TB somehow. And it's a long story. She got married in Israel, left on a honeymoon, and almost died in Switzerland because of the TB. And unfortunately, she gave it to me also. So she recovered from that after 3 years, but she was housed in a sanitarium in Switzerland. And I was treated in Israel and with huge injections. They were very big at that time. So I'm cured, but I have a chronic cough, which got worse with the years because I have a condition anyway, but it's not fatal. But because of her illness, her parents left Israel and they settled in Munich, and they're all dead. I mean, I used to have a relationship with them. They all died, but my cousin's son, she has one child, and he lives in Munich. And he has 2 daughters, and I've been there several times. And there is a very prosperous Jewish community in Munich.
I want to switch a little bit and go back to your
Yeah.
story about
Mhm.
you. You've given us a lot of information about family members and
Right.
your relationships with them. What was it like for you being a child survivor, being a child during the Holocaust, even though you may not have all of those memories, but you grew up in Palestine? What are some of your earliest memories of a Holocaust
Well,
community in Palestine?
I think my earliest memory is I remember when immigrants first, I think the war was still going on, but somehow, don't ask me how, somehow they got out of concentration camps. They managed somehow to come to Palestine. And I remember coming them to see my parents. And as a child, I thought they looked horrible. My sister would always run out of the house. Me being a child, my parents would shush me away. They'd go into a room, close the door, and then I would stand next to the door, and all I heard was that they were crying. And that's basically my earliest memory about the Holocaust, that these people were coming to our house, and I couldn't understand why they shut me out of a room, and I would listen to them. I did. I put my ear to the door, and I would listen to them cry. So
Were you understanding at the time what they were talking about, what they were crying about?
I couldn't really hear them talk. I knew they were talking, but at the same time, they were all crying a lot.
Must have been very confusing for you.
It was, and nobody explained anything to me. My sister didn't tell me anything. She knew what was going on, but she would just run out.
So do you remember when you became aware of what this all meant to you as a young person?
Not till years later, actually. As I say, we weren't thought of as natives as true Israelis. We were thought of as refugees or yekes. Just excuse me, I have to get a candy. No, I have one. I know I have one. Can we just?
Sure, take your time. Is it okay to talk about this?
Yes, it is. I'm just looking for candy.
Sure, take your time.
I always felt that I didn't quite fit in. My sister felt it much more than I did. I was not part of, as a child, in school, I was not part of what you'd call the social circle. I mean, you know, like the in-group. At the age of 12, my father sent me to school in Switzerland. He found out I was getting over TB. He found out he had cancer, which actually was later on was totally related to the time he spent in hiding in his warehouse, smoking away, and that's what the American doctors explained, and the relationship between the cotton and the smoke probably contributed to his cancer of the bladder. He had his first operation in Israel, and then they told him, he was very young, he was 51 years old, they said to him, if you want to be helped, come to America. So, and this is basically the reason why I finally came here. He died in New York. But I went to school, a boarding school in Switzerland, outside of Geneva, for the year. And then I came back to Israel when they did. And when I went to school, I guess the second year of high school there, all of a sudden they all gravitated to me because I spoke English. And I was sort of a celebrity because I went to school in Switzerland, and I came to New York for a short time. And then he got sick again and came back. They went to New York, and I spent 1 year going to school in Israel, 1 year in Switzerland, 1 year back in Israel. No, 1 year in Montreal, went to public school there because my sister and brother-in-law were already living there. And then I had 1 year again in Israel. And then I left the country. To this day, I regret the fact that I did not serve in the Army. Because you do go into the Army after high school before you go to college. And because all my friends, they always told me that's such a wonderful experience in the Army, but of course it was peacetime also. So to this day, I have my, shouldn't say oldest friend, but my friend of longest standing. I still talk to her. I just spoke to her yesterday. And of course it was horrible what she told me. And as I told you, my nephew and my great-nephew are there now.
Because we're having this interview truly following the weekend of a lot of massacre and Simchas Torah and Hamas infiltrating Israel.
It's beyond horrible. But look, during the Arab-Israeli War, I mean, I remember that as a child. I remember the kibbutzim that were attacked. And children, kids, I know they were drugged, you know, because I'm talking about little kids. No, they were drugged by their parents so they wouldn't make a sound, and carried by older children right near where the Arabs were attacking. But they had to get them out of the kibbutzim. They couldn't leave them there. So we have the same thing happening now. There's no end to it. And at least I get the feeling that most of the world is with us this time, where it wasn't before. I still remember it was very difficult, the stories I heard, when the State of Israel was established. Haganah, or IDF, whatever it was called at the time, they had no weapons to speak of. I mean, this country didn't want to sell them weapons. They had to get them undercover. They had to fly things from here to there. France sent weapons. Czechoslovakia apparently sent weapons planes that were totally kaput, as we say, defunct, but they made them work. They used to call them primus. I still remember the word. Which, you know what a primus is, right? It's like, I don't know how to describe it. Something you cook on, you use to cook with. It's a pot, something. But this is a country that I remember as a child being told a story in school, which was a true story, but which unfortunately is no longer the case today because they've become very sophisticated, the Arabs, the Hamas and those other terrorists. But at that time they were fighting, of course, the armies of the different countries. Totally unsophisticated, and apparently the Arab League was called, were afraid of the dark. Many of them were afraid of the dark. So the Israeli soldiers decided on a ploy. They had to retake something. They sent out, they didn't have enough soldiers. They sent out donkeys with phosphorus over, painted them in phosphorus. Phosphorus, is it? It's a iridescent thing in the dark. And the Arab soldiers thought these were monsters, and they ran away. So, yes, I mean, these are some of the things I do remember. I remember we all had to learn how to climb a rope on a wall, and that was part of your school. We learned how to use a rifle. I'm sure that those are totally defunct today. I wouldn't know how to use one, but we were taught how to use one. We also were taught how to climb, how to go, how to cut barbed wire and go underneath the wire. So it wasn't easy growing up under those circumstances.
And at which point did you realize that you were part of a Holocaust survivor family?
I never thought of myself as a Holocaust survivor because I always thought that I really didn't experience anything. My parents, my sister did. I didn't even know I was a Holocaust survivor. What happened was that, I don't know if you know Hannah Lessing. Do you know her? She's one of my closest friends. She came to New York. First time she ever came to New York, many years ago. She came to 92nd Street Y, I remember. My cousin that I was close to, that lived in Munich, told me that she knew her quite well. She said, make sure you meet her. And so I met her after a lecture that she gave there, and there were a lot of people there. And I came up to her on the stage and I said to her, my name is so-and-so. I said, I was born in Vienna on such and such a date, and my cousin is so-and-so. She said to me, oh my God, you're a survivor. Just like that. I said, no, I was just born there at the wrong time. She said, no. She said, let me explain to you. By definition, you are a survivor, which I never knew. So I'm extremely well read about the Holocaust. The book that I'm just finishing now is not a new book. It's called The Pope and Mussolini. And what you read in there, all related to the Holocaust, and the church's feelings is so unbelievable. And what Pope Pius was like, and the whole Vatican, and some of the other books that I've read so many books about the Holocaust. Can't read enough about it. And one of them, which is fairly new, is in the Garden, what is it called? It's about Christians who saved Jews during the Holocaust. And it goes almost country by country. And I knew about the history of, like, Valerian Riba. He was a Christian who saved a lot of the very famous Jewish artists during the war.
So you enjoy reading about the Holocaust?
Very
You've
much
also
so.
told me that you've spoken with students
Yeah. Mhm.
in schools.
But I speak to them mostly about my own, when I talk to students, I give them a little background because I find, first of all, students today do not know geography. They don't know how close all these countries are. So I usually have a picture of that. But also, I give them a history. I only talk about the Holocaust and what happened to the Austrian Jews and what happened to my family. But I give them a little history background as to when the Jews first arrived in Austria and go on from there, because they don't know any of that. You have assimilated Jews, Jewish kids in colleges that have been totally converted by the Arabs. Not Arabs, Palestinians, I should say. How they feel about Israel. And of course, the definition of anti-Semitism today is, if you're anti-Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. That's the definition. And they don't seem to understand it.
Is there anything about your story that I haven't asked you about, or that you haven't yet expressed, that you would like to talk about?
No, I think that's about it. But if you ask me, like, just comes to mind, if you ask me about how I feel today as it relates to the Holocaust. First of all, I'm not religious. I always belonged to a Reform temple. I belong now here in Palm Beach to the Palm Beach Synagogue, which is modern Orthodox. However, I've encountered a few remarks from people, and by the way, a lot of my friends are Christians, they're not even Jewish. But if I ever get any kind of a remark, like someone said to me the other day about an office building owned by a Jew and horrible, I said, excuse me? You know, I react to those kind of things. Also, I try to educate my non-Jewish friends. They really don't know. I mean, some of them are very well educated, and they do know. A lot of them didn't know the church was so anti-Semitic. I told them. I also find that, before I left New York, I had dinner before a concert, which absolutely shocked me. A Jewish teacher in the public school. I was with a Hungarian friend who did go through the camps, the end of the war, and survived. So we're talking about dogs, and this friend of mine said, oh, she'll never forget her little dog that she had in Hungary. This Jewish teacher turns to her and she said, so when you were sent to the camp, why didn't you take the dog with you? I mean, what does that tell you about ignorance? I mean, this is mind-boggling. They know nothing about, because I can get quite violent about it. They know nothing about the State Department and Breckinridge, who was the head of the State Department under FDR. They have said to me, why did you leave Vienna? I said, I was born at a bad time. why didn't you? And my father actually never wanted to go to Palestine. He really didn't. He was not a Zionist. He was a businessman. He said, what am I going to do in Palestine? I heard him say that many times. I said, we couldn't come to America. I said, the doors were closed.
So it sounds like you get really frustrated when people don't
What?
know. It sounds like you get very frustrated when people don't know some of the history. And
It bothers me.
your being a child survivor
Mm-hmm.
makes that more challenging for you?
Maybe more pronounced. I am more sensitive to people, maybe they don't even think when they say, oh, you know, these Jews from Boca are so loud. Well, it may be true, you know, but I need to defend them.
Yeah.
You follow me?
So it's the stereotypes as well.
Yeah, I don't really like it.
Yeah. What other things have I not asked you about?
I don't really know. I will tell you, my father always thought that Roosevelt was an anti-Semite. That he never understood, and believe me, he was never an American citizen. He never understood why millions of Jews paid tribute to him when he died. He understood it. I think it was one of the few that really did. So, and of course, I did read about the Roosevelt family, and his cousin Alice Longfellow, Roosevelt Longfellow, wrote the poet, right? The poet wrote very anti-Semitic poems. Most people don't know that, which is interesting. So this is, I guess, why I feel that you need to educate people. That's if they want to be educated. And I certainly don't ever want to hear from anybody telling me that Israel is an apartheid country and that the Israelis are treating the Palestinians like, you know,
In an apartheid way.
yes.
I really want to thank you for doing this interview.
Oh, I hope I was helpful in
You
some
were
way.
terrific, and thank you so much. And I think you've left a lot of information for your granddaughter to know about.
I hope so, yes.
You have some pictures that I believe we're going to take.
Do you want to
Stills
look
of
at
and-
these?
I'm going to hand it over to Carl because he knows where to put them.
I
so he
have
can
some
film them.
on my phone also. And this, you know, interestingly enough, I mean, Hannah is a very dear friend of mine, but also the consul, the previous consul general in New York, was a very dear friend of mine, and he's dead, but his wife is still my good friend, and I have several other diplomats who are very good friends of mine. So when I come to Vienna, they roll out the red carpet.
That's wonderful. That's great.
Now, I did go to, where was it? I went to Berlin. We didn't go to Austria. We went to Berlin I was on the Holocaust Commission in New Jersey. So I don't remember who organized this trip, but I was in Berlin the first time, and I remember we had these guides. They were young people. They were third generation. So I asked them, and they all have not one but two PhDs in Holocaust studies. So I know they get a stipend to do that. However, they were very engaging and very interested. So, and they knew a lot. So they took us around, they showed us different Gestapo headquarters and all that stuff. And of course, we went to Wannsee. Now, to me, Wannsee, every Jew should go there. And unfortunately, UJA never takes anybody to Wannsee, which I don't
It's a
understand.
little out of the way.
It's crazy. It's
Smaller
only,
place.
what is it? It's right past Potsdam. It's a 25-minute ride by train, that's all. I've been there 3 times.
It's so beautiful, you can't imagine what went on there.
But you know where I spend most of my time was looking up the records in the library downstairs.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. I mean, interesting, it's horrible. But they all confess. I mean, they tell you the truth. They say, look, our grandparents were Nazis because everybody had to join the Nazi party. Our parents were the silent generation. And I think many of them feel guilty also as to what happened. And of course, the Germans, just like the Austrians also, but especially the Germans, they preserved everything. So you go to Grünwald, which is a beautiful suburb, right? And you go on the track, the railroad track has the exact number of Jews, the first transport that went. And then the second, and you realize what it was. However, across the street, literally across the street, are these beautiful homes. Grünwald, I understand, was never bombed. So you have private homes going back to the 1920s. People, they can't say they never knew. They lived right across the
There were
street.
people in Auschwitz that lived in the community too.
Yeah, but those were cultured.
Can I borrow these?
Yeah, please.
I'm going to just
didn't
hand
wanna
them
take
over to Carl.
This to me is so beautiful because it says nur für Aryan may sit there. And if you want, you can copy this. This is something, by the way, that I got at one of the Wannsee conferences. I have, this is, I want to show you, the distant cousin. Okay, read his email.
Or maybe you want to read that, I don't know.
What?
What do you want to do first, pictures or what she has in her?
Maybe read the email first?
Yeah.
Do you want to read the email? Get that on film?
Oh, do you want to read it? Do you want me to read it to you? Yeah, it says, I have to put on my glasses. Yeah, you can read it.
Oh, it's you.
Oh, you want me to read it?
Yes.
Okay. I have to get my glasses.
Take
Okay.
your time. And you mentioned it in your interview, but if you just explain in a couple of sentences what you're reading, that would be helpful.
The Austrian government, by the way, Hannah was instrumental with that last year. I told you they put up the monument, and so they're putting together a book about the Jews, certain families that lived in Vienna and what happened. And so they documented me. It's a book that's supposed to come out this winter. I don't know much about it. I'll share it with you.
Please.
But they interviewed and filmed me at that time. Okay, so this is a distant cousin. We were his great-grandparents were our hosts in Brussels when we were there for several months. We stayed with them. And out of the blue, he decided to do a family genealogy. And so he said, and he sent it originally to my sister, but she had passed away already. So my nephew sent it to me, and then I wrote to him, "Many thanks for your email. I can see a family resemblance in your photo. I certainly wonder how we are related, an intriguing mystery. Raymond," this is my nephew, "mentioned that your mother was born in Ekaterinoslav, as was my grandfather. I can only suppose that we share great-great-grandparents. Do you know anything more about your mother, her family life in Ekaterinoslav? I really don't. Very interesting about your grandfather. We are quite musical also. I used to play the violin, as did my grandfather." Oh, my great-grandfather he was allowed to live in Moscow because he was a musician in the Tsar's court. "I live what has been my dream life, a farm on the island next to the beach in the sun. I moved here to Australia a few years ago from the UK. No more grime, graffiti, and frost for me. Such a pity that I did not have a chance to communicate with your sister. I think she would have been so surprised." He said he received some information from French-Belgian Genealogy Society. Katzel is the family name, and then it leads to Ekaterinoslav, and then it gives the correct address, which is in Belgium, of his great-grandparents, which is Rue Hotel de Montagne, I think, in 1939, and that he took from the census of 1930. You would have stayed with my great-grandparents, listed here as Isaac and Rachel Katzel. So he would have been 80 in 1939, which fits with your sister's description, that they were elderly. His parents were Solomon and Berta, and another name. So regards, Jeremy. So I think that was interesting. This has nothing to do with
Sort of
my.
closes a loop in some ways. Yeah. Thank you.
I
And so, I also want to suggest.
Oh, if you want some from my phone, well, I can.
Yeah, Carl, that, there's some pictures also in the book. I don't know if that's helpful.
Okay, you want to do those first or those first?
I think these first.
Okay. I'm on, I'll zoom in on those pictures.
So can you tell us?
I don't know if it's relevant or not, but this is my mother. This was my mother.
So maybe Vera, if you explain those pictures first that Carl has put on the table.
Oh, can I take them?
If you explain them, because he's zooming right onto them.
Oh, this is, I was a baby in Vienna. This is my grandfather holding me on a park bench in Vienna. And what it says clearly in back of the bench, it says, "Nur für Aryan," which means only Aryan can sit there. Only Aryan, which means, of course, translate, only Aryan people can sit there. And this is a picture of my mother and me, also as a baby. And you see one of the nice buildings, public park, typical beautiful building in Vienna, which I still have.
I'm gonna just put these over here. all right.
And then, may I take this book?
Yeah, they picked some
Yeah,
pictures in the
I
back.
wanted to just try and,
They're all the way in the back, the
Yeah.
pictures.
so maybe you could
This is my
explain who
sister.
this is, but we have to put it up there while you're explaining it, if you don't mind.
No,
They got their thing going here.
It's good.
that's a picture of, is that okay?
Yeah,
The-
we're ready, you could explain.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's in the
Yeah.
photo?
It's a picture of my sister. I guess she was 7 or 8 at the time.
And her name?
Gerda Friedman Fink was her married name. And you want me to turn the page?
And you might struggle. Hold on. I have these clips. So the next page?
There's some pictures on the next page. There's several pictures there. I think, wait, I can't read the name here. I don't remember his name. This should. Oh,
Can you
this
see?
is Shulam Schechter, but he was not my maternal grandfather. He must have been my, I don't know who he was really. And he's not part of my family, he's part of my brother-in-law's family. And this is me again, the same picture you took before. And this is me, the baby, my mother, and my grandmother in a park. But I would eliminate those 2 pictures because they're not relevant.
Okay.
And I think there's another one. Yeah, that's my sister and brother-in-law.
Just hold it there, Carl, hold it, yeah, hold it like that.
This picture, my sister and brother-in-law, and I'm sitting right there at the bottom as a little girl. I was a flower child. And my mother and my father right here also. And that was on her wedding day in Israel. It was then Palestine, 1947 or 48. But it was before the state of Israel was established. That's my brother-in-law. There's just one picture of my sister, and I think that's it. My sister and brother-in-law in Israel.
You okay?
Yeah, when I talk too much,
Anything else that you can think of?
Hmm?
Anything else that we
Mm-mm.
need to do?
I need to take photos.
Okay.
Does he want the pictures from my phone or
I
not?
don't think the quality
That's
is
gonna
gonna
be
work.
hard, yeah.
You don't want it, huh?
I think the
It's
quality
gonna be
won't
hard to
come out
capture.
good. Do you need to take
Yeah, is that the
pictures?
same?
Still photos of you all.
Okay. Can I come stand behind you so that they can take some pictures?
Yeah, sure.
Don't forget to take your mic off.
Yeah, Jimmy, just be careful.
Thank you for the reminder. I'll take my
Watch your foot there.
Got it. Thank you, Vera.
Oh, my
I'm gonna
pleasure.
take some pictures. Are those from the top? Do you want to put the blanket somewhere special, or?
No, that's fine.
No.
It's a nice blanket. It's a fuzzy one.
I know.
I'll tell you what I am gonna do is I'm gonna move this.
Should I come down a little bit?
You're fine, I'll adjust here. Great, now just by herself. Thank you, ma'am.
It's beautiful.
Great,
Oh, thank you.
that's it.
Could I just ask you a couple questions for news?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You sit down.
Just hit the pause.
You're gonna be on the news now.
Um,
Lean back.
what I'm about to ask you, we might use in our newscast, so do I have permission to use
Yeah,
your?
sure.
Okay. You're a Holocaust survivor.
Right.
At one point, your family fled to Palestine,
Right.
and you saw a lot then, and now you're seeing a lot now, what's transpiring. What can you tell me when you saw the images or things over the weekend that bothered you?
Well, it's beyond any imagination.
Stop, Carl.
What's the matter? Oh, the microphone?
Sorry. Have a do-over here.
Do you want the blanket back?
No, I'm okay.
You sure? Are you rolling?
Yeah, I'm rolling.
Okay, I'll
I
just
think-
repeat, you were a
Right.
Holocaust survivor, you
Mhm.
fled to Palestine at one point in your life. You saw a lot of turmoil over the years, and now all of a sudden, we have another repeat incident that happened in Israel, taking older people, younger kids, like, how does that affect you?
It's beyond imagination. It's like it's another Holocaust. Here we started to establish normalizing relationships with some Arab countries. We were about to normalize. It was about to happen. And the Palestinians don't want peace. They want war. They don't recognize the state of Israel like they didn't before. They want to annihilate us, drive us into the sea the way they did in 1948. And of course, it's a horrible situation. There are going to be very large casualties, civilian casualties, on both sides, because this is an urban war that they're fighting. And I don't know what's going to happen. Israel was caught by surprise, and nobody seems to understand it. I don't either, because their intelligence is by far the best in the world. I've seen it operate, and there's nothing better than that. And it's another Pearl Harbor, 9/11 magnified in terms of human lives when you think of their proportion of Jews, of the Jewish population in Israel, and by contrast, the American population here. So it's even of a greater, it's like the two of them, Pearl Harbor and 9/11 combined, and more.
Somebody once told me, history doesn't repeat itself, people repeat history. Do you see that happening now?
Yes, yes. It's somehow, I just don't understand the Palestinians. We have normal relationship with, there are Israeli Arabs living in Israel, and they prosper and they have good lives. These Palestinians in Gaza live in dire poverty. They are subsidized by the UN to a very significant proportion. They are subsidized by some other countries as well. And of course, Iran supports Hamas. Iran does not want to see peace. And look, it's like in the old days when I think it was the Mufta who collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. So what does it tell you? Nothing has changed, almost nothing. And I'm just sorry that we cannot normalize relations with the Arab countries. It's all at a standstill right now.
When you see what's happening today, do you feel there'll be a rise in anti-Semitism in the world, in the U.S., here in Palm Beach County?
Well, you already see the rise without this incident. You already see the rise of anti-Semitism, which I really blame the internet a lot for it, because you'll always have radical people who are not human beings as far as I know. They're full of hate. And that's not going to go away. What I am impressed with is the amount of support Israel has received from other countries, from all over the world. And I'm very happy to see that. But unfortunately, I hope this doesn't blow up the Middle East, because obviously Iran is involved. I don't know to what extent, but they're very much involved with military help and financial help. I hope it doesn't escalate.
You're a Holocaust survivor. You've heard stories from your family or other friends. If I was sitting here and I was a Holocaust denier, what would you tell me?
I will tell you, first I'll tell you to go to hell. And then I will try to make you read some books about the Holocaust. There were some non-Jews, mostly Christians, who were heroes, who did save quite a few Jews from the slaughterhouses. But what else can you say? I mean, to me, they're criminals. Nothing less. And of course, they're totally ignorant. But there are a lot of ignorant people in this world, too. And obviously, they have a lot of hate that's directed against the Jews. I think you can start by trying to help them to read some books so they understand, but most of them do not.
Does it anger you?
Sorry?
Does it anger you?
Yes, very much so. It especially angers me when some Jews, I'm talking about college students, are so greatly influenced by terrorist propaganda on college campuses and anti-Zionist. Because to be an anti-Zionist means you are an anti-Semite. That is the definition. It's not my definition, but that is the definition of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Yeah, of course it angers me, and I don't know what's going to happen. However, I also am, I hate to say this, but I really hope we don't have any terrorist attacks here, because I was watching the news yesterday, and there were pro-Israel parades, of course, while the UN was deliberating. However, around the corner were the Palestinians parading, and you should have seen, I don't know if you saw the signs they were carrying. They were horrible. I don't know. This could be, there could be an act of terrorism happening there too. I did notice from my own synagogue, because going back 2 years ago or so, we have security on the premises during all the holidays and Saturday services. But I noticed when I went there the other day that they doubled the security. And that in itself is unfortunate. Churches don't have security, they don't need it. So
it kind of feels like we're going down a dangerous path.
yeah.
Thank you. If I wanted to use anything that you said earlier in your testimony, is that okay as well?
Yes, fine.
Thank you. Okay,
Not a problem.
I appreciate it.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
good. Will I get a copy of it, or at some point, or?
For the news part, we
No,
have
not the, I'm talking about the
Showa stuff,
Showa.
yes. Showa will reach out to you in, I think, about 6 to 8 weeks, and provide you a link that you can share with your family.
You have, because I can give you my card, but you have my email and
I have
everything.
contacted.
Brent does.
Yeah, okay.
And it takes about, it's actually running about 8 to
I
10
can't
weeks.
see you.
That's okay. It's taken about 8 to 10 weeks
Okay,
to get the interviews
that's fine.
back.
Yeah. I also send in some information, Vera, to them, and then they
Yeah, okay.
sort of turn it around into things. Thank you so much. It's
Oh,
been-
I do want to share, I forgot to tell you
right,
something
thank you.
talking about ignorance.